seated.
Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome back to Talk Law Radio, where we help you discover your legal issue blind spots by listening to me talk about the law on the radio. And today we're talking with Angela Barker about healthcare compliance. This is a hidden legal issue blind spot, whether you are the owner of a healthcare company or whether you are a patient of the healthcare company. You need to know that there's regulations and laws that healthcare company needs to be following. And so part of Angela Barker's business is to help that healthcare company comply with all of those regulations. Tell us about that.
Yes. So with Maxim Healthcare, we had internal auditors that would come out once a year to kind of get a pulse check of where we were at and identify any gaps in our processes so that we could fix them, come up with a plan of correction to fix those so that we could be in compliance. So I know some agencies may not have that internal compliance aspect. So at times when you're doing audits, you kind of get a little bit blind as far as you're seeing the same thing. So you need that outside person to come in and review the documentation with a new set of eyes. So we can look to make sure that your documentation shows medical necessity, that you're billing accurately, because OIG is coming in and trying to recoup money. And, if
what is OIG?
The Office of Inspector General. And so they are coming in. Also, MCOs are reviewing the documentation.
What is MCO?
Managed care organizations. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So they are coming in also to look at that documentation to see, does it support the care that's being provided and the codes that are being billed as well.
So you mentioned the previous company you worked for, Maxim.
Yes.
But now you own and operate Covenant
Legal Nurse Consulting.
Nurse Consulting. And so you can be that third-party auditor,
yes.
Not to turn them into the authorities, but to help them correct whatever you find that's missing or that isn't going well.
Correct. So I can go through, do an audit to look at their documentation, their billing practices, and if there's any gaps that I find, I can help them put a plan in place to address those so that we can fix them before they face an audit, and especially from the state or a payer source audit. So we can put a plan in place and then help with administrative tasks. If they have any investigations that they need help with, I can also help with that as well. So sometimes they may have a patient injury or a patient death, and they're trying to get that, they need that assistance to look at that situation and see what could we have done differently to have prevented this from happening.
Mm-hmm. And so in that case, where you're trying to help them understand what happened in a bad outcome situation, what are some specific things that you would do?
So I would start by looking at what happened, the situation, looking at the documentation, reviewing the staff that was taking care of the patient. So did they have the proper competency to take care of that patient? Were they properly trained? So those are some important aspects of it too. Did they follow the plan of care? So each patient should have physician orders, and they have orders for PRN or as needed medications or treatments. So there's interventions that they could do if the patient is getting sick to try to get them back to healthy. Now, if they wait too long, then, the patient's just going to get worse. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of looking at the whole picture and seeing, okay, did they intervene properly? Were they properly trained? And was EMS called if they needed to have called them? Were they communicating with the office as well? Because sometimes in home health, the nurses could get comfortable and cross professional boundaries, and they see the parent as their boss versus the agency. And so the parent says, oh, you need to give this. They may not have the orders to give it, and they give it anyway. And
they're
so
providing health care in somebody's home.
Yes. And so sometimes that could be clouded, especially if you're taking care of a patient for a long term. You get comfortable with the patient, the family, and you kind of develop. I mean, it's good to have a good relationship with the family, but it's also to remember that you're staff and you work for the home health agency, you know.
And you're primarily focused on helping these companies with kids?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about a situation that came from a court case. The situation was that a young child, we don't know how or why, but fell into a bucket with cleaning solution in it.
Oh.
And so that caused the child to need hospitalization. So the parents took the child to the hospital, and the hospital admitted the child and performed some diagnostic procedures that revealed mild irritation of her stomach and esophagus. She had some vomiting but was eating and drinking satisfactorily, so the hospital discharged her. Maybe with home health, maybe not, but we'll get to that in just a moment. She came back to the hospital because she wasn't getting better. She was having more vomiting and diarrhea, not eating, not drinking. So she was admitted to the pediatric ward and continued to eat and drink, but also continued to vomit. Well, then she started having seizures. And so she improved with ventilation, was administered medication to stop the seizure, and was admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit. What you worked in one of those a long time ago.
Yes.
Well, then just after midnight of one of those days, the child had an unplanned extubation or dislodgement of her endotracheal tube. Can you describe for the listeners what are those things?
Well, that would be kind of, so normally for long term, they will use a tracheostomy for airway management. And for short term, they'll use an ET tube or an endotracheal tube. And then that would be inserted down the trachea and attached to the
mouth.
Yes.
Okay.
And then would be attached to the ventilator for providing that ventilation.
To help
short term ventilation.
To help the child breathe.
Yes.
Well, I guess unplanned extubation means that it came out.
Correct.
Maybe because the child was moving around or because of the seizure.
So and I saw that when working in the PICU. So at times, the respiratory therapist is responsible for making sure they put tape on, they secure the ET tube to the mouth. And so at times, with moving or just with, saliva or such, the tape would kind of get, it wouldn't be as sticky, it'd get kind of loose. And so the ET tube could come out. Get dislodged that way, or a child could pull the ET tube depending on if their sedation wears off. And so I actually had a patient that pulled, like we were just reviewing the sedation, and but the sedation was already wearing off, so it could happen, like even if you're like right by them.
And then they won't be able to breathe?
Correct. So they may have,
So what happened here is, because it came out, she was given oxygen via nasal cannula, at which time she was reintubated with the same thing and given a different seizure medication. Her vital signs were normal after that, but then the next time they measured everything, her heart rate and oxygen saturation were dangerously low. A measurement of her exhalation carbon dioxide level suggested that her endotracheal tube had again become extubated or dislodged, so it was removed. She was given mask-bagged ventilation. That's like probably what we see on TV.
Yes.
Where they squeeze.
They're putting it over their nose and mouth.
She was given atropine and epinephrine for her heart, but that was unsuccessful. CPR was administered, multiple rounds of that, and her circulation returned. She was reintubated, and a hypothermia protocol to reduce brain injury from oxygen deprivation was initiated. However, because of the oxygen deprivation, she developed hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, which I guess is irreversible.
Correct.
So what is that exactly, encephalopathy?
So she didn't get enough oxygen to the brain,
Yeah.
and so that caused brain damage. Is
Okay.
like a simple way to put it.
So the reason that this lawsuit was published is because when somebody files a healthcare liability claim, they have to get a doctor's opinion that was really, medical malpractice in layman's terms. But let's imagine that this patient didn't have brain damage, like she went home, but still needed to have that trach for breathing. And you've probably seen that situation before.
Yes.
Right? And so how is a home setting different than a hospital setting?
So the home setting, obviously it won't be as sterile, but they do supply the DME company, Durable Medical Equipment Company, will come and provide a ventilator. So if that patient was, had a tracheostomy and was on a ventilator, they would provide the ventilator for the home. The tracheostomy, the supplies. If they had a feeding tube, they would provide the feeding, enteral feedings, and all the supplies as far as like changing out the G tube. So the Durable Medical Company would provide the supplies. You still have to have physician orders to be able to provide care in the home. So there is a plan of care that is developed by the nurse who admits the patient based on the orders that they receive from the discharging hospital. And then they would have to make sure that the staff was trained and competent to be able to take care of that patient.
So the home health company would send
Yes.
nurses.
Yes.
And it's not like the parents have to do all of this complicated medical procedures themselves.
So they would
right?
have to be trained before
The parents have to be trained?
Yes, they have to be trained before they go home. So they do a rooming in process where for about 24 hours they are in charge of all the care, and the nursing staff at the hospital will just check on them to make sure do they have any questions. They have to be able to change out the tracheostomy. They have to troubleshoot the ventilator, because there are going to be times where the agency cannot provide staff. Maybe somebody called in, they don't have a replacement. So they have to have a backup plan, which would be the parents, and they have to be CPR certified as well.
And so let's imagine that instead of the bad outcome being at the hospital in this case, maybe the child pulls on this tube and it comes out while they're home, and you have parents and nurses providing some of the care. Is there ever a situation where you don't really know whose fault it is that the trach comes out and there's a bad outcome?
So, I mean, there could be an instance of that, but it just depends on when. You'd have to obviously look at the documentation, look at, interview both parties to find out when was obviously in the documentation with a patient that's on a ventilator, they're supposed to be assessing the patient every 2 hours, making sure the ventilator, checking the trach. So that's usually the standard is every 2 hours. So if they have a nurse there, they should be checking to make sure that the tracheostomy is in place. But at times, if you have gauze, you can't. I mean, there's been instances where the trach has come out and you can't see it because the gauze is covering it.
But this type of investigation would be something that you could help with.
Yes.
Like
yes.
if a home health company was accused of malpractice, your company, Covenant Legal Nurse Consulting, could come in and help that home health company assess what happened, who was responsible.
Yes.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about sinners, saints, legacy, and a lot more about home health compliance. Stay tuned.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.